Sit down, take a two and two, money till we get it. Wall, and that cool was ain't talking. Money speak, all that bullshit, keep it. Run the side.
What's your most popular TikTok video?
My most popular one is actually probably my dissociative identity disorder, like symptoms you might not know about one. I also have one that one of my alters made that she is introducing herself and she has a different accent than I do.
What accent is that?
That one got a couple million views and it kind of scares me. But
what type of accent is it?
She has this kind of British accent. She's not British. It's very hard to explain. But she was made in the mind of a 7-year-old in order to maintain the 7-year-old's secrets. So she's a tree. So she's a tree spirit. She doesn't speak to anybody else who isn't a child. Mm-hmm. And she kind of just keeps the secrets and keeps the children in the system safe from anything that might be going on that they don't want to interact with. So I don't know her very well because she won't talk to me as I'm an adult, but she has appeared on my TikTok before and on my YouTube and has tried to do the content thing and tried to get more involved. But I think there was a lot of backlash when it came to that major video that she made that went viral. People were like, oh, like you're not real. Like that's obviously fake. Or, a lot of people just telling her to kill herself and all these really awful things. And it just was kind of like, obviously it's not a safe place for that specific alter to be out. She's very vulnerable and emotional. So kind of a caretaker type. So it wasn't safe for her to be interacting online, but other alters like myself, James, and a couple others will interact on TikTok more than she does.
Okay. Well, can I ask, am I talking to an alter right now? I don't have a full understanding outside of what I know from, pretty much the internet, right? So I think I understand, the basics of DID, but maybe for anyone that's listening, could you kind of explain the kind of overview of what we're talking about here? We kind of just jumped right in.
Yeah, for sure. So DID is a trauma disorder. It starts off in childhood. So it's something that I've just had my whole life and I didn't really know about. I kind of, I was adopted at a very young age and went through a couple different homes and just a lot of abandonment. And there was a lot of stuff going on in between those homes that was obviously not good that I couldn't handle as a kid. So my brain just kind of blocked it out with amnesia. And that causes like your personality to not integrate into one personality. So it kind of is more like you have, instead of one full personality, you have different aspects of one personality that might be different to varying degrees. So we have, a woman alter who is a cis woman. We have me, who's non-binary, kind of don't really have a gender. And then we have James, who's more of a masculine protective figure in our system. And these alters are all meant to protect us from trauma or stressful situations that whoever was like originally born, like couldn't handle. And we all split from that. So it's kind of like if you take a plate and shatter it, where all the pieces, like we're all part of the original plate, but we all have like fractures that separate us,
Okay. And I think that clears something up for me. I think I had a misunderstanding there because in my mind, there's one, maybe this is the most appropriate terminology there, but one like original person, and then within their DID, there is, personalities that front. But that's kind of a misunderstanding. What you're saying is that each piece, the broken plate analogy, it's fully you.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, that is actually a common misconception, especially with when it's called like multiple personalities. That's the term that it was called in the 90s, and it was changed in the 90s to dissociative identity disorder, because it's really more like on a day-to-day basis, my identity will fluctuate depending on a trigger that I encounter. So if I encounter a trigger that James is meant to protect from, James will come in and step in, and he'll be a very protective kind of energy, I guess. And he acts a lot like me, but he's a little more gruff, and he's a little bit more like he definitely has differences. But to me, it's to anyone who doesn't know like the intricacies of my mind and how we talk to each other, they might not recognize that it's somebody different. They might just see that it's, oh, I'm just acting different or something.
Yeah. So when something like, James is present, are the other alters within you aware of what James is doing? And is that what you're referring to when you're referring to amnesia, as different alters experiencing life and then the other alters not being able to kind of recall or interact with it?
Yeah, that is something that happens. That's the amnesia stuff. So there's emotional amnesia, which sometimes we can recall what another alter did, but we feel like it wasn't us, and we have absolutely no like reasoning behind it. It's kind of just like if you were to sit in your body and watch somebody else take control of your body and do something, and you don't know why they're doing it. Like sometimes I'll go into my kitchen and I'll be like, what was I doing? I don't know what I was doing. And then there's a sandwich in front of me, and I'm like, oh, I guess I was making a sandwich. I was hungry and I didn't even know it. Score. So, but it can happen in like worse ways too. There are alters that, there are definitely problematic alters that are problematic to me, just in my health, is because some alters will have negative coping skills. And that's usually something that we call like persecutors or persecutory alters, who have kind of toxic coping skills, like maybe self-harm, or they're aggressive with people or internally with other alters. They might be kind of mean, and they might say things that, like if I'm standing in a mirror, I'll hear one of the persecutory alters be like, oh, you're so fat and ugly. I could do better than you. If I was in charge of the body, then I would make it look way better than you ever could. And it's just kind of like there's like constant dialogue going on in my head, between all these different parts of myself that disagree with each other. And part of therapy is bringing those, like different parts together to agree and to work together as a team, so that we can start remembering and the amnesia goes away. So I can start kind of remembering what Blaine does when he's out, or what James does. Like I have pretty good ideas of what James does when he's out. Sometimes it'll still be blocked out if he's really like protective against something that's traumatic potentially, or really stressful, something that I'm not supposed to know about. Like if we are in therapy and he's talking about something that was traumatic that he went through that I'm not supposed to know about, I won't remember it yet. But
such difficult things would be kind of stored within him, and then when it's time to process them, then something like James would kind of take over there. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yeah. And therapists can kind of pull certain alters out with like just speaking to the person with the ID and talking to them and understanding each of their alters, and like really giving them space to open up, because some alters will be more willing to engage in therapy than others. Some are completely against the idea. They'll be like, no, I don't need therapy. I'm perfectly fine. And it's like, actually, buddy.
Sounds like me. I don't need therapy. I'm perfectly fine. Well, is the, I don't know if this is necessarily an end goal, but you talked about kind of unifying your alters in order to have, a clear memory and interaction. Are you like aware of all these alters, and is the end goal there to kind of exactly what you're saying, kind of get all of your alters onto the same, I don't know how to phrase this properly, but like the same kind of playing field, to where they're all interacting, communicating, almost operating at the same time?
Yeah, so it really, there's two different terms,
if you will.
Yeah, there's two different terms. There's something called integration, which is what I'm looking for, which is all of the alters coming together and talking to each other, being able to communicate, having amnesia barriers down. So if one alter is out, another one can see at the same time, isn't necessarily experiencing it, but is aware or can be aware if they try. It's kind of like if you were to take a nap and, when you're really groggy and you're trying to remember a dream, and you can remember flashes of the dream. It's kind of like that when I wake up from a dissociation spell or a switching spell, is I will see what happened in flashes if I'm aware of what happened. And if not, it's just completely gone. Where did I wake up? What happened? So I'm trying to get to the point where I can have my memories basically be my own and share those memories as a whole. Then there's fusion. Fusion is when alters come together to become one integrated identity. This can happen after integration happens. So you have to integrate first, and then you can see if alters are willing to kind of fuse to be one whole. Alters can fuse like one at a time, two at a time, three at a time, and then there's also final fusion, which is all of them coming together to become one.
Damn, okay. So is DID partially like a journey to kind of integration and then the next stage fusion? Is it something almost like PTSD where there's steps where you can work through it?
Yeah, exactly. With like steps in overcoming each trauma and like each like complex like feeling that comes with that trauma, you have to kind of, work through each of the alters with, and then you can work on integration with each of the alters and like talking to each other, getting relationships between the alters to be stable is really important, and just having like good relationships with each other, because some alters don't like each other. Some of them will fight like siblings, or some alters with toxic coping skills, there are alters that might take on the same kind of identity as an abuser, and they might not be exactly like the abuser, but they will still enact abusive kind of scenarios in the headspace, like in your head, to kind of torture the other alters, I guess. And it is a protective technique in their sense. They think that if we do that enough, we'll be desensitized to it, so then we can't be abused again, right? But it still is traumatizing to yourself. It's still like re-traumatizing yourself over and over again. So you have to be able to work with each alter on what they're going through and kind of work on all of their issues, getting them to work together as a team. And that's why it can take, years and years, and it might not even be like fully done, because you might not have, you could still regain memories and uncover other alters that are hidden. So it's kind of like a never-ending process, really.
Uncover other alters that are hidden. I mean, are you pretty aware of all of your alters, or do you think that there's alters that you're unaware of or hidden? And kind of what does hidden mean? That's something super interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, from what I know that there are alters that I don't know personally. There are alters in the system that do know those alters, and they have relationships with them, and they keep them safe from.
Kind of like you had mentioned an alter earlier that she had introduced herself on your TikTok, but you haven't met her because you're not a child.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Okay.
So
she probably knows people that don't know you.
Exactly. She knows a lot of people that don't know me. A lot of the children, and I don't have any, I only have 2 kids that I'm aware of, which is Kay and Chris. They both hold some trauma from childhood, but most of it isn't stuff that I can remember. They remember for me, and they'll come out and talk in therapy and work with the therapist. But I won't recall anything that they talk about. So they'll also talk about other alters that they have relationships with that they want to work on in the system. And I'll be like, who are you talking about?
Yeah, surprised you. Wild. Wow.
Yeah, and I guess when I say hidden, I mean just like hidden from me. Like even if I were to go searching for it, it's kind of like if you go into my head, there's a bunch of rooms and doors in this giant mansion, and you can look through all the rooms and doors, and some are locked. The basement is locked. Those are probably where they are. They're probably in locked rooms. If you go outside the mansion, there's a whole world that is just endless. There's a forest, there's a beach, there is a desert with a bunch of holes in the ground, which kind of freaks me out. I don't go to the desert. But this is all stuff like, this is like a landscape in which all the alters can interact with each other. But some of them don't want to, so they hide in caves or in the holes in the ground or in a locked room in a mansion. So,
I mean, this very like visual representation of your mental space, is that something that goes heavy into your art?
I do paint a lot of landscapes that go into like how my alters present, how my inner world presents. But most of the time I just do realism and stuff. I've been working on realism lately, but a lot of my older paintings are very surreal, kind of visual representations of what I might see in my inner world.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm curious about the inner world there, because that's where, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you have, a mansion where the primary alters exist, and they probably, it sounds like that's where they live, and there's areas where they're locked away, and then outside that home is where all, tons of what we referred to earlier as like hidden stuff and hidden alters exist.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of access with my inner world. It's kind of hard for the host, which I'm a host. It's kind of the most, the person who's out the most and experiences the external world the most, except for like traumatic or stressful incidents. It's kind of hard for me to access the, jeez.
My fault.
But it's kind of hard for us to access that all the time, because it's not something that like I'm not always daydreaming, but other alters will be able to kind of experience that when they're not out. So like, since James isn't out right now, if he were to come out, he might be able to talk about the inner world more.
Okay. It sounded like you kind of had some would sound like archetypes for alters, right? So you called one a persecutor, and then we've called a couple trauma holders, and those both I think make pretty good sense just by the name. You can understand their role. Are there any others that are more like typical, or are there any other archetypes that you have?
Absolutely. We have the caretakers, which are alters that sort of take on a parental type of role, that might be older presenting. So we have Elise, who's about 40, and she cooks. I do not cook. I can't cook for myself. That's something that I don't know why. I think I just have issues around eating, but when I get hungry enough, she'll come out and she'll be like, you need to eat, you need to take care of yourself. And she'll clean my kitchen, and then she'll brush teeth, brush hair, that kind of thing, and just make sure the body is taken care of. Mm-hmm. And then there's the dad figure, who's Jasper, and he has a face that's based off of a character from Twilight, which is very interesting. But he takes on a very parental father figure role of a like father that I never had around, and it's kind of like these are parents that I feel like I wish I had, that would like, I wish my parent taught me how to clean, how to take care of myself, how to love myself, and I wish my dad would protect me. So Jasper, he comes out and he's very protective of who we're friends with. He wants to meet our friends and be like, okay, these are safe people. Wants to meet my boyfriend and make sure he's a safe person, that kind of thing. And that's not something that I had as a kid. So I think that I needed it, and my brain was just like, we need these types of people, so we're going to make them. And for other archetypes, there's like, obviously there's the kids who act like kids. They do childish things. And then there's the teen alters. And I think those are the ones that cause some of the most problems. There's Blaine, who also fits a persecutor role. He's great. I love him. There's nothing wrong with him. It's more just that he has an anger issue and he's very snappy. And, you know, if you were to interrupt him when he's doing something, he'd go like, fuck off, like, don't talk to me, you know? He is like, he can misread situations. So something that happens is he will think somebody is talking to him in an aggressive manner, when it's just kind of like a trigger that he's not necessarily aware of. And so he'll react as if it's an abusive scenario when it's just somebody's a little annoyed because I drank their milk or something. You know, it's not a big deal, but he'll react as if it is. And then there's Lucy, who does really impulsive behavior. So, and Blaine will too, if like you have friends around, peer pressure is really easy. So you could like bring any kind of drug out and be like, hey, why don't we do this? And those two alters will be absolutely, let's do it. Let's, you know? So I have to kind of watch who I'm around to make sure that they won't take advantage of those kind of like more vulnerable states of my identity.
Yeah. And that kind of makes me think of, you know, are there any alters that just hold different like character or integrity or morals than you typically would?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have Skylar, who I don't know too well personally, but I know of him and what he experiences. He comes out a lot during, I also am diagnosed with bipolar disorder, so I have psychotic episodes, and he'll front during those. And he's also a complete opposite of me. So he can be aggressive and not violent towards other people, but he can be hostile and not very friendly, and will cut people off and just not talk to people for like 6 months at a time. And I'll wake up and I'll be like, where'd all my friends go? Oh no, what happened? And that can be really scary, because I know that he's there for a reason. I know he's there because, you know, we had something happen that we needed to isolate from everyone and we needed to be safe in some kind of scenario. But it causes a lot of problems, because if that happens at random, you know, I just stop showing up at work. I stop answering all my texts. People are kind of like, are you okay? What's going on? And it's like a completely different person. And I think that's one of the alters that I have the most separation from, just because he's such a different character. Like, he's such a different version of me that I would never expect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sounds terrifying, right? The idea that, you know, you kind of lose consciousness for 6 months and then come back to, and like, oh God, consequences now from actions I don't remember taking part in. Yeah,
and that's the thing that sucks the most about DID, is that there is system responsibility, and that's something that it just sucks, but it's part of life. And you can't blame other alters for the actions, because you are all part of one. If Skylar is to, you know, cut everyone off and not talk to anyone, then that's something that I need to be aware of. And like, I need to be like, okay, that happened. I woke up, all my friends have disappeared and I don't know what happened. So I go to therapy and I work on Skylar's issues. And that's, you know, my responsibility in the system is to recognize kind of everything that's going on and try to address it in day-to-day life. As the host, I feel like part of my responsibility is to make sure that everybody else is okay too.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you're pretty open about your DID, obviously. You know, it's not something that you're very secretive about. When people get to know you and they start to see other alters fronting, are they as open back to you? Do they say, "Oh, you know, I see Jasper here," or are you open with them saying, "Hey, it's me, Jasper"? How does that work when you're interacting with people in your life?
It depends on the situation I'm in. If I'm in like a private, like hanging out with my friends or hanging out with someone that I'm close with, then yeah, I will have them be like addressing the alter by name and talking to them and that kind of thing. But if I'm out in public, or let's say I'm in a class or a group, a self-help group or something like that, then I'll just go by Destin, no matter who's out. And we all kind of will assume kind of like a natural state of like, we don't even control it. It's just like, we'll pretend to be one person as much as possible. Sometimes that's something that can't happen and we'll just act completely different. And this is when it gets interesting, because we'll meet someone in public and we'll be like, yeah, I'm Destin. And they'll say, you know, and they'll act like me, but I will front later and absolutely have no recollection of that person. And so,
and it was just an alter taking the host name.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
So some alters will be totally open with when they're out, especially with people they're comfortable with. But it really does take a long time for our system to warm up. I think the only person who knows every single alter in my system is probably my boyfriend, and that's because he's just seen us when we aren't even, you know, doing anything.
Wow. Well, I know we talked about getting on the wrong side of TikTok, and I think the number one thing I see, you know, really negatively towards DID people is the idea that it's just all made up, right? Just like anyone that's online talking about a disability people haven't heard of or aren't familiar with, even if they have, and, you know, people online, nothing's real to them. It's just, you know, you could do anything, it'd be fake. But I mean, how do your alters respond to that, and how do you respond to that? And kind of, is that something that's been thrown at you, and what do you think?
Oh yeah, I've had a lot of people say that DID isn't real, or that my DID isn't real, or that it's too rare for me to have, which I find interesting, because I mean, it's just, I mean, of course, if you find someone that has a rare disorder and you're like, oh, you have a rare disorder, like that's so, you know, weird. It's hard for somebody to understand. And I think I try to be a little bit more understanding when somebody's like baffled by it, because I was at first. I actually didn't believe in DID when I was first diagnosed with it. It was something that I thought was completely like some demonology bullshit. I thought it was, you know, oh, and possession kind of thing. So when my therapist sat me down, it's like, I think you have dissociative identity disorder. I want you to look into it and tell me how much you relate to it. Just see if it fits. If it doesn't, that's fine. We can find a different diagnosis and see from there. But I related to almost every single thing on the list. And I went to her and I was like, okay, what is this? You know, and she referred me to another specialist who diagnosed me with it. And I thought it was bullshit. So I found another specialist to diagnose me with it. And she was like, yep, you definitely have DID. And I was like, this doesn't make sense, because I would know, right? She's like, no, actually, you wouldn't. Oh, okay.
Amnesia, sure, yeah. That's one of the side effects, yeah, absolutely.
And
how long ago was that?
That was in 2020. So that was 2 years ago. And it is still something that I'm getting used to. I think that I'll still try to live my life as if I don't have other people sharing it with me. And some alters need to be addressed. Some alters absolutely need to have their needs addressed. And I will forget them. And then they will come and remind me that they exist. And that can look like a variety of different things. That can look like Andrea fronting at a party and introducing herself as Andrea to every single person and being like, I'm Andrea and I live in this body we have DID, and she's very open.
Mhm.
Or it can look like Blaine having a self-harm episode and ending up in a psych ward. So it can look like a variety of different things for me. And I mean, every system is different. Everyone has alters. Like my alters are very overt, which means they present very obviously for the most part. Some systems will have alters that are almost exactly identical in presentation, but internally they're extremely different. So it really just depends on the system.
Some can completely camouflage to what a typical host interaction would look like, and then some are, introducing themselves by a different name.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rough. And then, I mean, really, the goal of all of this is to fuse all of them. I mean, what does that look like? What is like a fused
System? Like? Yeah.
Yeah. What does a fused system kind of present as? Is it just a typical host interaction at that point because everything's kind of lined up?
Yeah. So it would probably be. So I don't have experience being a fused system, obviously,
Sure.
but from those that I know that do have experience with it, they talk about it as if every single alter is aware and co-conscious at the same time. And there is no more amnesia between them. There is no more emotional amnesia. It's all just, this is me. All of it is me. Every part of this identity is me. And I think if you think about it in terms of somebody who doesn't have DID, let's say like you go to work, you are a different person at work than you are at home, right?
100%.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. It's just that when I'm at work, I don't remember being at work. And I'm a different person at work, and I come home, and then I'm a different person at home. And I'm kind of more of the work and home personality, but that's kind of a easier way to understand it. But if I were to be fused completely, then I wouldn't have those separations between the identity. It'd be able to flow as one kind of thing, and it would be a spectrum, if you will, of myself rather than separate little chunks.
Yeah, absolutely. While you're still, might have to behave differently at work than you do at home, you're fully conscious and aware of those, differences.
Exactly. And sure. A fused system might still have some, separation and identity between, like, let's say they have an alter that fused with another alter. Let's say there's a system of two. That alter might be different than the other alters that exist. So like the fused one might be a new kind of person. And that would be like a mix. Like if you take red and blue and you make a new color, it's purple, but the red and the blue are still there,
Well, one thing I'm kind of curious about is the names of your alters. Are these names that you're giving them, or do they kind of have names? Where do the names come from? Is it just something like, is it a label you give them to be like, I know that this is a person because of the way that I feel this interaction, so I'm going to call them Blaine? Or is it, they kind of came with that name?
They kind of came with that name, most of them at least. They kind of present themselves. It's like if you were having a dream and somebody came to you in a dream and was like, hey, my name's Blaine. How are you today? And you're like, okay, that's Blaine, I guess.
Yeah, there's never a point of them being named. They just are. Yeah.
They just have a name. Some alters actually don't have names. Some are more fragmented, is what I call it. So they aren't necessarily a full identity. They're kind of more of a fragment of an alter. So they might only have a memory, or only hold a feeling, and be very dissociated from any identity whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And those don't necessarily have names. I'll sometimes come up with a name for them just so that they can start developing an identity, so we can work on whatever that is in therapy. But most of the time, the name just kind of comes with the person.
Interesting. I know you said you had an alter earlier that was a tree.
Yes.
Are there any other non-human alters?
Yeah, so non-human alters are interesting. It kind of comes from a place of a child feeling like they have been treated as a subhuman or as a superhuman in some cases. So in my case, we have an alter who's kind of demonic in a way, because we were treated as if we were possessed by a demon. My parents were very strict evangelicals, and they gave me a exorcism. So it was something that I kind of developed a alter that, views himself as having horns and kind of being a bad boy, like demon, so that it's kind of like the self-fulfilling prophecy thing. If a child is like told every single day, you're a liar, you're a bad kid, even though they're not, they're going to fulfill that role, to kind of be like, you think I'm that? Well, I'm going to be that. And I'm going to be worse than you ever imagined. So I think that's kind of where he came from. That's Blaine. And he's very rage-filled and angsty and,
But your parents performed an exorcism on you.
Yes, they did.
At what age?
I was 17.
Oh my God! They performed an exorcism. So I grew up fundamentalist Christian, right? I'm with it. You know what I mean? This is not. Some people would hear that and be like, I don't know, but boom, I'm with it. Totally.
Yeah.
Not out of the realm of possibilities for parents to do that, and for the parents to beg. It's because I love my child, right? For this reasonable, step by step, got to do a straight up exorcism on my, child with mental health problems.
Yes.
I guarantee I went to church with people that, got themselves in the same type of mess. But at 17, you are adult enough to kind of know. Well, I mean, were you a believer at that time? Were you?
I was. I completely believed that I was possessed because I was having episodes where I would wake up and not remember self-harming. So I was like, well, it must be a demon. There's no other answer.
And especially that's the framework that you have, right? It's heaven and hell. It's not, mental health shit that you're learning in church. It's heaven and hell shit. So
yeah, my parents didn't believe in mental illness. It was demons.
No, yeah, and people, it's hard to imagine a lot of people that didn't grow up heavily religious, how you get there. But it's like, that's the type of stuff you're taught. It doesn't seem out of the ordinary.
And that's this type of stuff that my parents were taught. It's just, it's been a tradition for years. My grandparents, were even more, fundamentalist Christian than my parents
or something.
Yeah, they're very, they were, I don't even know how to describe them without using some choice words, but, oh boy, very strict people.
Yeah. And so what did the exorcism actually look like? Like, what was the process of the exorcism?
So I had a pastor come to my home with his wife, and my mom was standing with them, and they all decided to do this circle around me, and they held hands. And I sat in the middle of them on my knees, and then they started putting their hands on me, and they were praying, but they were praying in like tongues. So that was like a huge part of it. And they put holy oil on my forehead. And then they started calling me by my dead name, which is I'm trans, and I don't go by that name. So my mom started calling me that name and being like, oh, this is the real one. You need to come out, let go of the, my child. And they all started shouting it and, chanting and praying over me. And they all had their hands on me. And I just remember feeling claustrophobic. And all of a sudden, I felt rage boiling over. And Blaine came out. And he looked at them. He's like, I fucking hate all of you. Get the fuck away from me. Stop touching me. And they were like, we found the demon.
It fits right into the narrative. Yeah, it fits right into the demon thing that they're seeing, of course.
Yeah. So, they really thought Blaine was a demon. And that's really when he kind of like was like, am I a demon? Like, am I really this evil thing that's possessing this poor creature, making them do all these bad things. And that's really not what he is. He's a 16-year-old boy that just really likes to swear and do things he shouldn't. He likes to smoke weed when he shouldn't do it,
Don't blame him.
Exactly. So I think it really was just that he was just a problematic kid that was being labeled as an evil creature. And so now part of his recovery is just learning how to love himself and not be so angry all the time. And it's kind of releasing all that anger at his parents and like the built up resentments that, like led him to exist, so that he can finally kind of feel at peace and free.
Wow. So, I'm sorry, you're like 23, 24. How old are you?
I'm 23.
So that was just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, you believe you're probably possessed by demons.
Yes.
And then within the past couple years, you find, okay, not demons.
Not demons.
Right. It's a trauma response. It's something I can work through. It's something. What was that like for you?
It was probably one of the hardest things in my life to kind of understand. I was deeply religious growing up. I really believed that if I was trans and openly queer and all this stuff, that I would be going to hell. So I was, I volunteered at my church. I did all kinds of church stuff. I was really into it. I got my friends Bibles for their birthdays, that kind of thing. And when my mental health started picking up, it felt like that's when I lost my touch with religion. It just completely crashed around me. And I was like, well, if I'm going through all this trauma, why is God like not saving me? I'm praying, right? And my mom would say stuff like, oh, well, you're not praying hard enough. And, stuff like that. And when I started getting worse, she did the exorcism and it didn't work. Everything got so much worse after that. I ended up in a psych ward and then she kicked me out. And I was on the street with my boyfriend for a while, just couch surfing. And I was having more and more amnesia and more memories and flashbacks and all of these horrible experiences just all the time. I couldn't stay stable for more than 3 months at a time. So I was in the psych ward about 9 times. Nobody could figure out what exactly was wrong with me. They said it was bipolar, schizophrenia, BPD, all kinds of stuff. Put me on more meds than I could think of. And then eventually they said it was epilepsy, which it wasn't. But I kind of just stopped believing in God, and I stopped believing in demons and spirits and all kinds of stuff. And I got really interested in nursing and psychology, and I looked into psychology stuff, and discovered trauma disorders, and was looking more into that for a while, and was going to therapy. And that's when, the dissociative disorder stuff came up, and I was very shocked by that. I think that when I was first diagnosed, it actually really pissed off some of the alters in the system. I remember Blaine being like, no, that's not true. Like, that's not, like, we're not crazy. And trying to throw himself out a window, which is kind of crazy. But after discovering the diagnosis of DID and talking to other people who had it and finding people like Multiplicity and Me, Entropy System, Bobo and Co., people like that, that talk about their disorder and their experiences, I suddenly was, oh my God, I can live. I don't have to kill myself because, other people are living with this and are thriving and, are healing. And
I
that
think
might
it's
be
incredible. You go from demon possessed and homeless to full-time artist in therapy. That's a pretty fucking bootstrap story right there.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
a fucking success story right there. That's wow.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, now I am running an Etsy store full time and selling paintings. It's pretty fun. Lots of therapy, a lot of therapy, but it is worth it. So
I know there's a comedian I know in Austin. She goes to therapy 4 times a week.
yep. Therapist is my best friend.
Never too much therapy. If it works, work it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that, I don't know, I've had probably the most growth in the past 2 years after being diagnosed than I ever have in my life. I remember when I was first diagnosed, I wouldn't get out of bed. I wasn't on any medication, and I was struggling daily. My kitchen was a disaster. I wouldn't leave my house. And now I can manage okay. I still have like a really hard time with getting out of my house and talking to people sometimes, but I do have a service dog now and she helps a lot. So
Awesome.
that's been a plus. And just like embracing the alters, I was absolutely terrified of embracing them and allowing them to showcase themselves and to be themselves, but that has improved our relationship so much, and just the relationship with myself and being able to understand myself. And before, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was like, I have no ambition, I have no motivation, I don't know what I like, because I didn't know myself. But taking time to know each of the alters, I get to know what I like, what I dislike, what, art style I do best, that kind of thing. So yeah, my diagnosis saved my life, I have to say.
It's good to hear. And in a lot of this, did you learn from the community that you became a part of that you're talking about? You said Bobo Co. and a few other names, and some of them sound familiar. They might have come up on my feed online. And that's kind of the strategy that they're kind of implementing as well. Like embrace your alters, interact with them, get to know yourself.
Yeah, it's a huge thing in the community of just acceptance and allowing your alters to interact, be themselves, as much as they're comfortable with. And, setting boundaries with your alters, learning how to have relationships with each of the alters in your system, and like letting them have relationships with each other and not being afraid of what healing looks like. And it can be really, really, dirty sometimes. It can look awful and just, but after a couple years of, going through it and facing some of the most argumentative alters in my system head on, and just being like, listen, we need to work through this. Like, we have to work as a team, because this is a body we share. You don't get to destroy it because I live here too. That has been, I don't know, something that I didn't know I would be able to do, but now I'm able to actually function a little bit better.
Awesome. I think a lot, and I think, I can admit definitely my first reaction too. A lot of people see it and they go like, no way, right? If it comes up on their feed, you watch a video and you think, is this person doing is this person lying to me, or are they delusional? Yeah. Do you think any of the people that you see online are faking it?
I think that there are people that do fake it, and that's something that might be controversial for me to say, but there are people who do lie about it. Maybe like 5 to 10% of people in diagnostic criteria, based on what doctors say, have been found to be faking it for manipulative purposes, such as getting out of a criminal charge, which is not something that can work. It's actually something that now, if you're diagnosed with DID and one of your alters shoplifts, you will still get charged.
Yeah.
which I 100% agree with. I agree with like system responsibility, and something that I don't believe in going up to anybody on TikTok and being like, you're faking. I think that you have to take it with a grain of salt. Maybe they're lying, maybe, but there's a slim chance. And I think that if you really like get to know the person and get to know their alters, you can kind of determine that. But I think for the most part, people are being honest because it is a very stigmatized disorder. I think that there are, of course, going to be some outliers that are trying to get attention or are trying to just do something because they're a teenager and they do things like that. This is something that happened with the schizophrenia community. People would pretend to have schizophrenia for a while because there was a movie about it. And I think that the more publicity DID has, there's going to be more of that. But I also think the more publicity it has, the better, because we need more awareness about this disorder.
Maybe less people think they have a demon possession, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, yeah. But I do think that there are people that do struggle with this, and there are such dramatic presentations of it online that are misleading. Which is why I really try to be as open and honest about my experience as possible so that I can educate as many people as I can. If somebody doesn't believe me, I usually don't take it too personally. It is kind of hard to believe experience, and it is very subjective. Dissociative identity disorder is, it kind of overlaps with something called maladaptive daydreaming disorder. So a lot of the internal world experiences that feel very real are just daydreams that we can't control. And the identities are very real identities that exist within us, but the complex narratives that might build those identities might not necessarily be true. And there's always kind of a nuance to it that the therapists have to kind of take into account. So if you hear something like completely unbelievable, it is possible that it is made up. But for the most part, it sounds unreal because it's a daydreaming disorder as well as a dissociative disorder.
Not just with DID, and maybe this makes me dumb, but like with anything, I always figure the best practice is just to interact with good faith and just assume no one's lying until you have obvious proof that they're lying. Unless it leads to serious consequences, I won't get anywhere in life if I just doubt and assume everyone's lying.
Exactly. I go about it.
Sell me a car, it's a different fucking story, right?
But if somebody has obvious proof they're lying, then I'll be like, okay, I'm suspicious. But for the most part, I take it. I'm just like, yeah, you probably are experiencing that, because I don't know why someone would fake, a whole experience like this.
Yeah, that's the way I say it is. Unless you're trying to sell me a car, I have no way of saying it. I have no interest in doubting someone. You know what I mean? I read a story about a guy who saw a trucker that had a monkey, and the monkey had a little bat, and the monkey with the bat fought a Rottweiler. And I was retelling the story, and my chick was like, "Do you believe that?" And I was like, "Why not? There's no reason not to. I don't not believe it. I don't believe it."
Who knows, really?
What was that?
Who knows, really?
I mean, it's true to someone. Why wouldn't it be true to me?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Maybe that makes me not very critical person. I would never be a journalist or anything, but for the most part, I just think, if it makes sense, make sense of it.
Yeah, no. And I think with things like DID, there's always going to be like extreme experiences, and there's going to be experiences that seem more normal, and it all just depends on the individual and what they've been through. It's subjective experience, and mental health that's why it's so hard to diagnose people with things, is because it's all a subjective, experience.
I had a buddy of mine who's a doctor on, and we were talking about like chronic pain and the overlapping of like illness fakers. And she kind of had the same thing where it's like, you should never assume someone's faking illness. And that's only led to, more problems in the medical industry, not less problems.
Yeah.
And she was like, always, start from the starting point of like, there are diseases that only one person will ever have, right? there's a diseases that only 100 people will ever have, but they live 1,000 years apart, right? Like there's like
Right.
so much stuff going on. Always just operate on that base level that someone like you would know yourself best.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially when it comes to like getting diagnosed with DID, if you think you might relate to some of the experiences or whatever. Like I think just taking it from like the doctor being like, oh yeah, you relate to some of this, let's just take it from there and see how it goes. I've had a lot of experiences of doctors just not believing me, and thinking that I'm either making it up for attention or that I'm delusional and psychotic. And that has been really hard to get accurate treatment because antipsychotics don't work for DID. Medication doesn't work for DID. It's therapy that works for DID. And that's the only thing that's really benefited my life, other than like my bipolar meds. But
medicine doesn't work for DID. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so because it's a trauma disorder, there isn't necessarily an anti-PTSD medication either.
Mm-hmm. It's a process that you work through, right? Yeah.
Yeah, DID is really just a very complex PTSD syndrome. So if you think about it, everyone with CPTSD, PTSD experiences dissociation and dissociative episodes. But with DID, it's a lot more severe. It's kind of like, in my experience, it's like, this was too severe for me to have gone through. So it had to have happened to somebody else, or I've already been through so much. Yeah, and it just doesn't fit into my story. It can't. Someone with PTSD will go over the same event over and over and over again, like in their head, and kind of relive it. But with someone with DID, we have alters that are reliving those traumas over and over again, stuck in the headspace, and a separate part of our consciousness is living day to day. So it's just kind of even more separate than PTSD.
Yeah. Well, we're closing up on an hour here. I'd love to hear kind of like final remarks on things that you would love people to know or love people to look up, or any resources that you say, hey, this is my number one. Check this shit out if you want to know a little more info, even if it's your own TikTok, whatever it is. Where do you direct the people listening to the Fart Locker to head to?
Yeah, so my TikTok is the Cryptid System. If you want to follow me on there, I make jokes about DID a lot of the time, but I also make some educational content. I think one of the best DID resources right now is probably going to be did.org. They have a lot of really good information about dissociative disorders. So, or just dissociativedisorders.org too. They're really good. And if you want to check out my artwork, I have an Etsy. It's Destin Draws Store on Etsy.
Fantastic art. Fantastic. 10 out of 10.
Oh yes, thank you.
I used to sell websites to artists, and my favorite thing to say to artists, because it's very true, is the best art doesn't get sold; the art that gets seen does. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That was a slogan of mine. I didn't make the phrase up. I'm kidding. But it's a lot. Man, well, thank you so much for coming on, and your cat. Your cat had a great role. I appreciate everything that she contributed to this as well.
She's very loud.
Yeah, and obviously you're more than welcome back on. You were very fucking interesting. It was very, very, very interesting perspective, and I really appreciate you coming to share it with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time. I'm glad we were able to finally pull it off.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people hear the Fart Locker and they go, I'm out.
I had to say, I was like, what am I doing?
Bouncing on foes like trampolines. Just a great state of tickets, I can't believe. Run the side, run the side, run the side, run the side. Swerve the rims glistening. They got see the wood cause the top is missing. I sleep on dreams cause it's paper I'm chasing. My roots come from Texas, this inflation. On the side, on the side, one the side, on the side. On the side, on the side, on the side, on the side.